in the United States. Advantage one, uniqueness number one, supply chains for REEs are weak. The argument is oil and fossil fuels are infrastructure exists now, which drives costs lower, but this increase in potential profit margins. The B argument, supply chains are weak. The United States production of rare earth elements is reliant on Chinese export. 85% of the global neodymium production is Chinese-based. This accounts for over 5,000 tons per year. The C argument is this: neodymium and dysprosium are heavy and heavy monazite deposits exist across the southwestern United States. Failure to mine this is a result of lack of investment, not the lack of land. The D argument is this pushes investors and developments for RE mining in the status quo. Only secure investments can solve. The second argument is that neodymium is necessary for renewable green energy. The A argument is neodymium is vital for neodymium iron boron alloys, which are the strongest commercial available permanent magnets. The B argument is that offshore wind requires significantly more neodymium than is currently available. The C argument is that nickel and metal hydride batteries, which rely on neodymium, are the primary battery technology in the first generation electric vehicles. They're cheaper than lithium-ion batteries, which make them better for transition. The D argument is that electric vehicle traction motors require neodymium magnets due to their weight concerns and strong resistance to demagnetization. The E argument is green energy transition relies on investors. Material shortages make it unlikely that investors will put cash into the transition now. The third argument is dysprosium is necessary for nuclear energy. The A argument is dysprosium titanate is an attractive absorber for material for commercial thermal neutron reactor control rods. The B argument is the nuclear industry is shifting away from boron steel and boron carbide control rods due to the radiation-induced damage discovered by Russian water reactors. The C argument is dysprosium titanate experiences little swelling. There's no outgassing under neutron radiation, and there's a high neutron efficiency, which also contributes to heat resistance. The D argument is that it's empirically proven to be the best material for control rods. The Russian water reactors have used dysprosium titanate to control rods for 17 years without issue. The links. The first of the plan increases neodymium stores. The A argument this increases domestic production of neodymium, which drives down the cost of neodymium supply lines and offsets the Chinese exports to the United States markets. The B argument this increases domestic stores of neodymium. This ensures that industries are not reliant on constant import. The second argument is the plan increases dysprosium stores. The A argument this increases domestic production of dysprosium and drives down the price of dysprosium. The dysprosium right now is an all-time high at $600 per kilogram. And as of 2021, the B argument is the plan increases the stores of dysprosium and decreases the importation necessity. The third argument is cause investment in green technology. The A argument is raw materials are necessary key. This reduces the reliance on external material production and ensures supply lines are stable and production is steady. The B argument is green energy is high returns but high cost. Any way to decrease the overhead and initial cost makes the transition more profitable. The C argument is the primary barrier to transition is cash. Fossil fuel investments cannot be offset without attractable, profitable energy infrastructure. The D argument is it reduces the uncertainty and regarding importance and ensures that transition occurs. The impact is going to be climate change. The argument is reliance on non-renewables necessarily cause of climate change, particularly the greenhouse gas effect means that gases are trapped into the atmosphere, which contribute to heat in the atmosphere. Heat's trapped in the atmosphere, which contributes to runaway warming. The B argument is this causes extinction of warming waters, causes eutrophication of the ocean floor, and this causes phytoplankton die-off cycles, which kill, or algae bloom die-off cycles, which kill phytoplankton. Phytoplankton are responsible for 90% of the Earth's oxygen. Advantage to uniqueness one is the United States military industrial capacity is low now and decreasing. The air emissions. The tech sector is contracting due to COVID. Chinese raw material production, Taiwanese semiconductor industries have created global bottlenecks. The B argument is that slows down the United States industries and hamstrings advanced technological capabilities. The United States industrial base has been decreasing because of supply chains weaknesses and material shortages. The C arguments industries are increasing aware of industrial capacities and returns are increasing risk without the constant supply of REs. This means that they are pulling out now. There's only one manufacturer of the missile tubes necessary to be able to create Zumwalt class missiles. The Zumwalt class missiles, they have the missile tubes that on the ships. There's only one manufacturer for those. The second uniqueness, the future United States hegemony relies on REs. The A argument is logistics. REs are used for GPS systems and advanced communication. The B argument is combat, automobiles, missiles, laser targeting systems, and Lockheed Martin's new lasers necessarily rely on REs. The C argument is the single F-35 Lightning II requires around 920 pounds of REs to build. D argument is that the United States cannot produce enough REs for all sectors of military production, which means that they are hands-freeing themselves the link. One is this increases investment to mining. The arguments mining companies exist and monazite mines are demarcated. It's only a question of being able to reactivate them and begin operations. The B argument, the federal funding is necessarily key to decrease the barrier to entry and overhead costs become less of a concern. This makes it more profitable to mine these deposits. The second argument is the planned costs consist of a major industrial boom. The A argument is the U.S. weaponry development increases the production, necessarily increase the production and allows for this production to actually go somewhere. The B argument is this increased internal investment in supply chains are shored up and decreases risk. The C argument is this increases the United States This ensures the United States industrial base is no longer vulnerable. The D argument is the industry is necessarily key to hegemony. China knows it can immediately shut down the United States weapon manufacturing, which is key. And China demands that. And small states like Israel expect important imports of new technology, which means that the United States' future cooperation, military cooperation among different states is necessarily key. Relies on industry. The third argument is future high-tech weapons stop war. The argument is Russia, Ukraine indicates the advanced weaponry is necessary to stop conventional wars. A lack of javelins and manpads have caused Russian armor to be incredibly effective, and Russia's opposed Trump to Trump exporting its own javelins because it knew those javelins could stop the Russian advances. The B argument is drones indicate that laser targeting systems and advanced computers are necessary to wage war in the modern age. The C argument is the United States leadership and exports are necessary to stem war. The opportunity cost of conventional war rises with higher potential casualties. The impact First is going to be great power, where the A argument is United States retrenchment causes power vacuums to exist. The B argument is regional. This causes regional conflict with regional hegemonic interest, i.e. that in a world where the United States necessarily pulls back from a specific region, these regions necessarily get controlled by the most powerful actors. This is already seen in a bunch of different places. The C argument is the instability and conflict cause a draw, and this is uniquely proven by the United States in places like Syria and Russia. In places like Syria, the D argument is this always causes nukes, particularly because proxy wars are not viewed as existential, and they are necessarily external to the great powers' ability to actually or like threat construction of their own areas, i.e. that they don't like destroying proxy areas where proxy wars necessarily occur do not actually pose threat to their own stability. The second argument is going to be small state security. The A argument is that the United States leadership allows small states to leverage their own power in economic discussions and negotiations. This means this because there's no risk of collapse in the United States. Is there? The B argument is that it stops necessarily proliferation. The Ukrainian government necessarily stopped proliferation as a result of the United States saying it would back them, and NATO necessarily saying that it would back them. The C argument is that proliferation causes extinction. Oh, actually, Ukraine's a terrible war, and we'll go with I don't know, Turkey. The United States proliferation risk stops Turkish proliferation risk rather. Okay, Flex.
2 minutes starting now. Is the United States federal government intentionally lowercase?
No. I just didn't want to press shift when I typed out the plan.
Good question though.
Yeah.
Okay, we're unmuted.
Awesome. I am gonna go 4 off, and then I'll go down the aft, top down. Awesome. Perfect. If we're all good to go. Beginning. Now, interpretation, rare earth element means elements that are fractionally uncommon or hard to find in the United States. Violation 1, dysporium isn't uncommon according to major elemental building blocks by King's College is about 31 ppm of the Earth's crust, meaning that it's the 20th most common element. 2, neodymium isn't uncommon according to the CRC Handbook of Chemistry and Physics. Scandium exists at 38 milligrams.
Neodymium, not scandium.
Neodymium exists at 38 milligrams per kilogram in the Earth's crust, making the 27th most abundant element. And 3, you like defined as the periodic table. Standards 1 topic literature, all the most relevant topic literature discusses RE as elements that are fractionally rare and yet necessary to make green tech, such as lithium, and there are plenty of articles about why things like lithium are good. This controls the internal link to clash. Even if your app is educationally abstract, we can't clash with it because we can't predict its existence, so we don't learn anything. B, predictability, your app is predictable because there's not any literature about it, so we can't discuss it. This means we can engage. C, Grant, we can never read turns or decides to your app, since there isn't any literature that justifies these arguments in the first place. All of the neg ground justified by the topic literature concerns decide to the lack of access to REAs, leading to U.S. imperialism. No one is concerned with things like yttrium. 2, limits. There are infinitely many obscure elements you can defend, each of which are chemically obscure and have different advantage stories. For example, your interp justifies nuclear energy arguments like yttrium. Military arguments about scandium are interp solved because it limits you to fractionally rare ones, which guarantees the next sticky offense because it's rare, and it requires that the US go get it, but still allows AFLEX via the ability to pick rare earth elements. Through ground, we lose access to important decides about why these elements won't solve in this quo, such as US imperialism arguments. This is key neg ground because otherwise we have to defend reasons why elements like neodymium are bad, which is harder not justified by the lit. Voters 1A priority, you need to know the rules of the game before we can play it. 2, fairness use evaluation is the only way we determine whether your arguments are true. 3, education is axiomatic to the activity and the reason people support debate. 4, competing interests over reasonability because reasonability is arbitrary and leads to judge intervention. 5, draft the debater to discourage further abuse. 6, LLC theory over MG theory because A, magnitude the abuse happened earlier around. B, excuse the LLC, we were only abusive because the PMC wasn't. C, MG theory is OP, you get golden turns in the PMR. Next off. Uniqueness 1, the stock market is slowly recovering after COVID and was fully stable before Russia invaded Ukraine. The Dow and S&P hit all-time highs in December, according to Forbes. 2, however, it's volatile because of the invasion. Dow and Nasdaq have dropped most days since Russia first attacked. Even the European Securities Markets Authority has warned of a possible crash. B, collapse hasn't happened yet because investors predict the conflict will end. They know that Russia's running out of weapons and resources. C, sharp drops are followed by recoveries, which substantiate the collapse won't happen in this quote. According to NPR, both the Dow and Nasdaq rose 1.5% one week after dropping the day before. 3, independently, the conflict has increased investment in the defense sector. According to the alignment, Russia invading Ukraine and the possibility of China invading Taiwan has made investors bullish about weapon manufacturers in the defense sector companies. Links 1, the plan causes investment uncertainty because it's a massive policy change by the federal government, which makes them weary that their investments will actually be profitable. And investors will believe that new technologies will crowd out their products, causing mass sell-off. To the plan destabilize the defense industry by causing investor uncertainty. Investors see this as a massive shift away from previous trends in the industry, which was primarily focused on cyber. A, this scares investors away from the defense industry as a whole, as they don't want to lose money in a very unstable industry. And B, investors perceive this as a move of the USG away from large deals with defense contractors. Impacts 1, economic collapse. The stock market is worth $30 trillion and 143% of our GDP. Market watches U.S. households are more invested in stocks than ever before, so crash will kill businesses, consumer confidence, and the economy. A, global poverty. U.S. collapse will throw hundreds of millions in poverty, which means people are either dead or dehumanized. B, great power when econ and shambles is much easier attacking it. Draws in U.S. allies to help, which is why the Great Depression led to World War II. Next off, framework women talk about the queer now we chose the future prioritized by society, examine the motivations of the symbolic order that produce them. A narrative construction in the future impossible as none of us have access to all the information to save the world. Rather attempts at constructing a future sort to sustain the symbolic order. This is how early slave rebellions in the U.S. by Gabriel Prosper and Natural Never incorporated into the official narrative slavery abolition. B, challenges the political structure that engage in forms of oppression are absorbed and translated into more of the same. Look at how human rights campaign cutting the trans community out of its movement and prioritizing marriage equality and adoption rights to seem more politically valid to societies as constructed as part of a historical trajectory of progress rooted in futurism. Interrogating the teleological narrative of progress is key in debate. A, futurism poses an ideological and non-social, political, and cultural discourse. Debaters are trained to think within teleological conception. Futurism look to apocalyptic link scenarios. The classroom is where we are produced as good social citizens, and we're enlisted in the fight to preserve the social order.
Which skews the evaluation.
Which skews the evaluation of
PMC.
The PMC 3 framework. Fiat is illusory. Nothing happens when you vote out for nigger. Or only relation to debate matters. The focus on the fiat also sees our individual agency, which kills value to life. Therefore, the role of that is to vote for the best team that challenge the ideology of futurism. Links 1, threat securitization, the an effort to securitize humanity from existential risk. This justifies an endless crusade against queerness, which is inevitably positioned as a threat to the heteronormative futures. ADA, this logic of securitization against any vaguely possible war scenario replicates infinite violence. 2, productivity, your econ impacts are an attempt to ensure continued progress of humanity. Which is how the U.S. justified violence against undocumented immigrants. Impacts 1, homonormativity, the forced assimilation of formerly dominant queer identities and to normalize modes of life, denies queerness by eradicating difference. A, eradication of deviancy, ideology of progress creates an impossible endless crusade to assimilate or punish deviants and other excluded identities in an attempt to extinguish difference. B, because of oppression, in order for some individuals to be defended in their name of humanity, there must be some identity deemed to be non-human. It is It is just that some humans are treated as humans and others are dehumanized. To Turns Casey, harms of this quo are perpetuated by an attempt to order the world according to heteronormative aims. Alternative, vote nay to reject the reproductive futurism of the 1AC and embrace queer unintelligibility. When we choose not to establish a place for queers inside humanity, thereby we shift the structural persistence of queerness to some other population. Instead, we embrace our embodiment of the state of objection. A attempts to engage in policies are futile, and B, our opposition must be anonymous and mob-like. 2, fails any attempted permutation, continues to rely on normative structures and positive politics using the 1AC to like make us all the same. Next off, CP, the United States federal government should significantly increase its funding in solar power energy projects in the United States. Competition, 1, we compete through net benefits because it doesn't trigger the descent to functionally competitive. There's not enough resources for the U.S. to do both, especially when we're pouring money into Ukraine. Solvency 1 solves the F, and 2 avoids the DA. Solar tech is proven and investors know about it already, and B, doesn't trigger defense stock sell because it's not the same industry. But now, let's move on to Advantage 1. On the top of Advantage 1, realize that there are no refineries in the U.S. right now that are like used to refine the rare earth elements, which means that like even though we mine them and we have them, there's no way to actually put them in the green tech because there's no refineries. Don't let them get up and make a normal means argument because the GOP isn't going to want to invest in this because they want to delegitimize the Biden presidency. But then realize that green tech can never solve because A, we're way past the brink on climate change. Russia is methane drilling right now and pouring like hundreds of thousands of tons of methane into the environment, which means we're way past the brink. And also, even if we all transition to green tech right now, it still wouldn't be enough to save us from the brink. And then on all of the stuff about nuclear, turn it, indigenous communities are uniquely harmed by nuclear development because a lot of the mining for uranium takes place in indigenous communities, which is uniquely bad.
Not uranium, the mining for the element that we mentioned.
Yeah, the mining for neodymium takes, and it also water runoff. All of this mining causes a lot of pollution that is just offloaded onto indigenous communities. But on the links, yeah, you can cross-apply stuff there. Let's go on to...
the plan decreases investment in green technology because investors are afraid of it.
Oh, yeah. The plan decreases investment in green technology because investors get really afraid of things like yttrium because they've never heard of yttrium before. What they want is solar energy. So the plan, or the counter plan is going to solve that. But on to Advantage 2. We're going to impact turn and go down to the impact sheet. There's a lot of reasons why prolife is good. 1, stability. If Ukraine had nukes, Russia would there's no reason Russia would have invaded. B, we would tell you that it decreases the opportunity cost of having nukes. And D, it decreases imperialist violence because the US isn't going to imperialize other nations if they have nukes. Yeah.
Read the Israel argument.
Okay. We also tell you that the plan galvanizes Israel to use their nukes.
But U.S. hegemony galvanizes Israel as per all of the arguments about securitizing the small states. That leads to structural violence against Palestinians.
Okay. Yeah. So the AF galvanizes Israel, which leads to structural violence against Palestinians because of the reasons they've stated. We would also tell you that U.S. hedges them specifically bad. The first reason is imperialism. The U.S. goes into certain states and imperializes them either through economic means or by literally toppling their government. We'd say
Prolife checks transition wars. If countries are able to access nukes, then there won't be wars.
Yeah, prolife checks transition wars. If countries can access nukes, there's not going to be wars, and the U.S. is also going to be afraid of their nukes.
Can we get texts, please?
Yeah, I need text.
Because you define as periodic table of text. Okay.
So we've gotten some arguments that we should include the violation when we send the text. So we're just
All right, sure. Thanks.
Wait, so the text is just the first part, and then the rest is violation.
That's correct. There are 3
Okay.
violations.
Cool.
Cool. Oh, wait. There's still a counterplan. Cool. Status of both the alt and the counterplan.
Well, it would be kind of funny if I said they were both unconditional, but they're both condo.
Okay. What's your link on the defense industry to said?
Yeah, the argument is that investors are perceiving the app as a military or a shift in military strategy as per all of your analysis and advantage too, because even if it is the case that rare earth elements are important for US military strategy generally, the investors do not see that in the status quo, and they think it's a policy change.
Okay.
It's going to be T on top, then it's going to be the app straight down, then it's going to be the K, then the disad, then the counterplan. Anybody not ready? Oh, I forgot all my sheets.
You, apparently.
Oh no, sorry. Anybody not ready?
T on top, app straight down, and then
K,
Counterplan this.
E, A, C, counterplan. Okay.
C, T.
All right.
hey, counterplan disad or disad counterplan?
Disad counterplan. I don't know. Maybe I'll go crazy with it. Okay. On the interpretation, counter-interpretation is that the International Union of Pure and Applied Chemistry states that rare earth elements are the 15 lanthanoids and scandium and yttrium. We were able to meet this because we talk about neodymium and dysprosium, which are both lanthanoids, which means that we actually the counter standard is going to be the counter standard is going to be topic literature. It's much better on topic literature. They define what this term indicates. Your term is actually defining rare metals. All these specific topic literature. Our topic literature is always going to be more verifiable because it's not based on opinions. This is about what every single chemist in the world thinks, which means it's always going to be more proximal to any form of this. And the next standard is going to be framers 10. Alex wrote this paper specifically to utilize the term of rare earth elements, but also we would indicate that you are you're term going to be wrong in the world. You're talking about rare metals in the first place. Next in the violation, we're going to say that we meet they are necessarily rare. 31 parts per million. There's only 31 in a whole million. It's pretty rare. But we would also indicate in the second one that we don't have a lot of them in the first place because we're not extracting them, which means that they're not particularly rare. Which indicates you say topic literature. I've already answered this. You say can't predict. We're going to be more predictable. One because of framers intent, but also specifically because of how it operates within the applied chemistry in the first place. Next year, you say your interest able to resolve this, but it's not specifically you explode limits. I use anything that is not rare. You can just have something about selling rings or whatever, or like gold because it's hard to find different things like that, which infinitely blows up any form of being able to resolve this. Next on competing interpretations, we're going to prefer reasonability because reasonability is defined as whether or not you have terminal defense or offense against the sheet, and this is going to resolve any judge intervention. On to the app. You said there's no refineries, but you've considered the link level that we increase the amount of investment that happens, and the investment is coming in the South Coast indicates that the refineries get built. We don't fiat, but they happen anyway. You say we're past the brink because of Russia. What's the argument there?
Because Russia pollutes.
Huh?
Because Russia pollutes.
Oh yeah. You say we're past the brink because Russia pollutes. We indicate that doesn't matter. It's necessarily how much we pollute in general. I.e., that if we pollute an infinite amount versus a lower amount, the impacts of climate change are always going to be worse, which indicates that being able to mitigate is always going to be key. But also to push the time scale back to be able to develop things like carbon capture is able to bring us back from the brink.
More heat in the atmosphere is bad.
Yeah, more heat in the atmosphere is so bad. Makes you say indigenous communities, but we didn't think that we're able to resolve. We're able to resolve this. There's no link. The mines already exist, which indicates like in places like Valley in Monzonite Place or in Idaho already exist, but they're just closing the South Coast, means that we don't cause new operations to happen. Which is able to resolve this. But we'd also indicate the plan consults Natives USGS SN 500.6 and Executive Order 13175 means a consultation with indigenous leaders is a precondition to mining permits on increased RE mining on indigenous lands. it's able to resolve this much better. But you see the investments are going to decline because they're afraid of solar. But solar investment has been happening within the status quo. It has been happening within this, or people aren't necessarily afraid of this because it's like electric cars. Elon Musk is super popular anyway. Yeah, but also it's like things like offshore wind, which they're already industries that exist. It's just like increasing the ability to buy them.
Structural impacts of climate change.
Give
me a structural impact.
Oh yeah, it's using the impacts we're thinking about climate change causing extinction, but also there's a structural impact of climate change. I think the most disproportionately marginalized populations are going to be hurt the worst. On to the second one. You see the proliferation is good because it would have prevented Russia, but proliferation would have caused a Russian first strike. That if we just gave a nuke to Ukraine, Russia would have just nuked them first, so that they aren't able to develop this because they're afraid of being nuked by their neighbor, which indicates that it's absolutely going to be worse. You have no warranty. You see this decreases imperialism. We would indicate that hegemony is the only system that's able to decrease imperialism because we stop imperial powers like Russia in the first place. You see this galvanizes Israel in Palestine. We would indicate this is not unique in the world where Israel is able to develop things like the Iron Dome out of their own volition. We would indicate that the necessarily you consider the Afghan necessarily gets rid of things like qualitative military edge towards Israel in a world where we're not able to ship out military technology, which causes worse forms of securitization, which causes Israel to lash out much harder because they no longer have the best planes in the world, which means that they securitize harder, which would inevitably first strike their neighbors because they no longer have things like air superiority, which means that they have to utilize their comparative advantage against nuclear weapons, which means they absolutely are going to be worse. But you can also tell the U.S. hedge is able to prevent a great power war. You read no defense about how we're not able to increase hedge in the long range, which means we're able to resolve this 100%. This is definitely good. On to the K. On the topic of the criticism, you see this excuse evaluation. We indicate that evaluation is still possible in a world where you can still contest the specificities of the argument, i.e. the link, warrant, structure, impact, which is always going to be key, but also specifically that there's no world where excuse evaluation, a world where a future is good, the future is necessarily good, but also that the value gets written in the future, which indicates that there's no terminal distinction. We would use safety out as a loser, but that doesn't matter. So our orientation, i.e. that we can generate a particular policy-making operations, i.e. that being able to understand the levers of power is always going to be key to sort of inroads, being able to understand how power operates and not have the state pressure movement, which is always going to come first. Next, you can go down to the role about the counter role about before the team that best prevents material violence, best prevents material violence. This is always going to be better because it allows us to understand state making and policy making. Next one, links we're going to indicate that futures is absolutely going to be future. The future is definitely going to be good for a couple of reasons. The first is that it's key to any form of survival strategy. I.e. the indigenous and feminist scholars necessarily have to envision a world in the future. Often envision a world in the future free from things like patriarchy and colonialism in order to generate things like survival strategies. In the first place, you preclude any sort of methods like this, but also the time is necessarily key to healing. The individuals who suffer trauma sometimes have to just envision that they can move further away from it via time, and that there's a future where they're further away temporarily from their trauma. It's a method of healing which you also preclude. We would also indicate that seeding the future is always going to be bad because you see it to individuals like fascists because you preclude any form of strategizing. But fascists definitely still strategize, but also you say but also you literally have to go and check into work to be able to produce the resources under capitalism and to survive, which means that you're definitely not going to be able to survive in a world you don't think about the future. Next to you, we indicate it's not able to define social relations because people care about other things. The next articulation I want is that we would indicate the threats are definitely real. Russia's literally invading Ukraine in the south, which means that we have to be able to resolve this next. There's two relinks. Your economy impacts are predicated on the future, and your impacts are also predicated on a foreign debate that exists within the future. These are pretty terminal relinks. When you try to preserve a sort of system that exists within the future, we would indicate the relinks are always going to be worse than links because the intentionality, i.e. that murders worse than manslaughter, which is always going to terminally just frame out of this is also going to be out for any of your discursive indications. Conditionality doesn't mean that you're able to kick out the words that you said previously, which indicates that this is floating. It's floating out. It's sticky offense. You say it turns case. It absolutely does not turn case because we're still able to resolve U.S. hegemony. Hegemony is able to resolve that. On the alt. If you're really unintelligent, the first argument was the permutation do both. If you're really unintelligible, the perm definitely is going to function, but you're definitely not able to resolve any of your implications because of the strategy take us, but also you're not able to resolve the affirmative because you don't increase U.S. hegemony. On to the disad. Next articulation is that the economy is way over the brink. The war is taking way longer than it looks like, which indicates the sanctions are going to keep coming. They're going to last a really long time, which indicates all these investors who pulled out their money are not going to put it back in, which means there's no way that this is going to go down. We indicate that the defense sector spending has actually doing has been increasing anyway, which indicates that it's definitely going to be good. Countries like Germany tripling their defense budget is good for defense contractors, which indicates they're going to be able to resolve this next. We want the little insurance that we improve the industrial base, which long term fix the economy, which is going to be much better. We're going to say there's no massive sell-off because individuals understand what RE mining is in the first place. That is key to things like wind farms and green tech, but also this isn't a big change. The America Competes Act necessarily already indicates that moving towards decoupling via RE is American policy, which means they don't necessarily freak out. Also, there's no war from econ classes. It's inductively denied in both 2008 and 2020. Next, on the counterpoint, we indicate the permit's pretty killing here. It's just an advantage counterpoint, but also the permit's able to resolve both of these the permutation, or sorry, the counterpoint is not able to resolve advantage one particularly because it doesn't create things like offshore wind, but also it's not able to resolve advantage because it doesn't increase our competitive hegemony advantage. But you also triggered the disside because it's a massive move away, which is unexpected at a time like this. But also we indicate that solar is always going to be bottlenecked by sulfur anyway, which indicates it's not able to resolve because you have to get sulfur from other places like Africa.
One minute starting now. Is futurism able to solve war with Russia?
Wait, did you ask was or is?
Is.
I would say that hegemony is able to stop great power wars, so yeah.
Okay, if we're futuristic.
In the future.
Okay, is futurism able to solve climate change?
Yeah.
All right, is futurism able to solve economic collapse?
Yeah, probably.
All right. We got the counter-interp text.
Yeah.
The states or indicates. Whatever.
States.
Okay.
Oh, wait, I see
the
now.
order. Oh, you see now. Okay. You said that very intentionally. The order is going to be counterplan on top, then the criticism, then the where's that sheet? That doesn't matter. Counterplan. Okay. Interp. Disadd. Then the AF, focusing on the sort of like solvency dump at the top. Everyone ready?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Kick the counterplan not going for its conditional terms. It just has a competition, not advocacy. They can't derive offense from it. Go to criticism. Kick the alternative not going for it either. Here, we will deal with the relink debate. We will concede that we relink back into the criticism because we are very futures. We'll also concede that relinks outweigh links, which means that we're more futures than you. But we'll concede the impact on the futurism is good. The explanation of cross-examination is that futurism is able to solve back for all the impacts of the status quo independently of the plan text of the app, which means that if we lose T, then you still vote negative because we're more futures, and that solves war with Russia, climate, econ, all that fun stuff. Go to T. You have massively undercovered topicality, and the critical issue in the MG is that you have not read any fairness offense, which means that if we win that fairness outweighs education, then we have definitely won the round. Extend the interpretation. Mining means, or that's the wrong extend the interpretation. Rare earth element is it means elements that are factually uncommon or hard to find in the United States. You have conceded the three violations. The first argument is that dysphorium is not uncommon. It exists in 31 parts per million of the earth crust. The second argument is that neodymium isn't uncommon. According to the CRC handbook, it exists at 38 milligrams per kilogram of the earth crust. The third argument is that you define it as the periodic table. You have a couple of meanings. You say that 31 parts per million is really rare. Number one is that's not rare. It exists massively more than lithium. For example, lithium exists at 1 part per million in the United States. It's 31 times more common than lithium, which means that the lithium, which we recommend that you defend in the first place, is definitely more rare. Second is that it's the 20th most common element in the crust, which means that it's not fractional, which means that it is not rare. The third argument is that even if you think that they're like ahead on the question of whether they textually meet, just remember that experts think that it's not rare. All of the violations are sources from expert handbooks that say that it is not rare because it exists at these concentrations, which means that experts don't think that it's rare, even if it exists as a relatively high parts per million. Also, 31 parts per million is definitely not, 31 parts per million is very common. Experts think it's common. All of the violation warrants are reasons why experts think it is a common argument, or common element. It exists very commonly. Next, you read an argument that you meet because the reason why it's uncommon is because we haven't mined it up right now. That's not a we meet articulation. That's just a reason why your app is inherent. It doesn't change the fact that you're trying to mine up elements that exist that are fractionally not uncommon. There exist in a plethora of standards. Extend topic literature. You can see that all of the relevant topic literature discusses rare earth elements as elements that are fractionally rare and yet necessary to make green tech. The example that we provide is lithium. There are plenty of articles about why things like lithium are good. For example, you could read reasons why lithium are key to making lithium-ion batteries, which are necessary for green technology. But there's a plethora of NEGRA because lithium is not common in the United States, necessitating that the United States would have to go to other places to get lithium, such leading to imperial violence, which you have conceded. The A supported that you have conceded is that we control the internal link to clash because we cannot prep out your app. Even if your app is educational, the abstract and learning about it is good, we can't clash with it because we cannot predict its existence. The B point is predictability. Your app is not predictable because there's no literature that discusses it, which means we cannot engage. You read a couple of turns, you say that you're more predictable because the framer's intent. I'll answer that on counter-interp. You also said the chemistry is predictable, but remember the topic literature means there's no predictable ground. Even if it's a predictable definition, there's no ground that we can get from it because all of these elements are common in the first place, so there's no dissets that are justified by the topic literature because the topic literature is more concerned by things like lithium. The third argument, or the C point that you have also conceded is ground. We can never read truisms to, or turns or dissets to your app because it's functionally a truism, because there's no literature that justifies these arguments existing in the literature base. In the first was all of the NEGRA justified by the topic literature concerned lack of access to rare earth elements leading to U.S. imperialism. No one is concerned with things like neodymium because it's not relevant, because it is not uncommon and therefore not a rare earth element. The second argument that you conceded is limits. There are infinitely many obscure elements that you could defend, each of which are chemically obscure and have different advantage stories. For example, your interp could concern nuclear energy arguments, which you did. You could also have scandium arguments that implicate the military technology and how we build drones, etc. There are tons of different affirmative stories because each of the rare earth elements defined chemically have different chemical properties, which leads to infinite app stories. Our interp solves because it limits you to fractionally rare ones, which guarantees the neg sticky offense because it requires the United States to get it in the first place, which may involve going to other countries, which would lead to our imperialism dissent. But it doesn't over limit the app, which is not even an argument that they read in the first place, but it doesn't over limit the app because it still gives you the flexibility of choosing which element that is fractionally rare to defend in the first place. Lithium is not the only topical version of the affirmative, which means that we're definitely ahead on the question of limits. Extend, or your only answer to limits is that we over limit because things like gold are hard to find and they're obscure for the negative. But you've conceded that the process of being hard to find in the first place is sufficient sticky offense because we could read offensive reason why that would lead to things like imperialism, which is bad. There's also no warrant why gold is relevant in the topic literature, which you've conceded constraints discussions of limits in the first place. Also extend ground. It's the third standards. We lose access to all of the dissets that we were previously mentioned, which is important. NEGRA because no NEGRAs means we never win the round. Counter-interp. Yeah, I'm not saying anything. Counter-interp. Your counter-interpretation is that rare earth elements is the chemical definition. Number one is that the topic literature arguments are all a dissent to your counter-interpretation because there's no ground that is for the affirmative that is justified by the second. Your say topic literature cross-apply or ground arguments. It's not a question of whether the topic literature justifies you being textually correct. It's whether the topic literature justifies there being arguments for the negative within it. If you define rare earth elements as chemically relevant, yeah, that might be defined by the topic literature, but there's no neg arguments defined by the topic literature, which means that we definitely, our second argument is that our literature outweighs on relevancy, even if it is a technically coherent definition to say that it's a question of what is a relevant chemical definition. Ours is more relevant because it concerns what would actually be done with the rare earth element. You've conceded all of the explanation as to why lithium is far more relevant for discussions of the resolution than things like yttrium or neodymium, which you discussed in the first place, which means that we're definitely ahead on the question of relevancy. But also, even if you don't buy this is just education offense, we have independent inroads to fairness, which we will say, oh wait, second, you say framers intent. That's not verifiable. You could just get up on the app and on the neg and read a T-sheet and say framers intent means that we violate, which means it's impossible to verify the intent of the framer. Second of all, for using the framers intent when you wrote the resolutions definitely turns fairness because you, as the framer, could always define us out of the affirmative if you were neg, or you could always justify an infinitely untopical app if you are app by just citing framers intent. It's non-verifiable and supercharges fairness abuse. Next, go to the voters level debate. Extend the fairness use evaluation. Fairness is the biggest impact in the round. It controls and outweighs education for a couple of reasons. Number one is that it's use evaluation. You can't determine what arguments are educational if there's a lack of fairness in the round, because that begs the question of your ability to evaluate the round in the first place. But a lack of fairness means that we haven't been able to adequately test their arguments or their educational value. Two is that education controls the internally to educate, or fairness controls the internally to education's being able to be deployed in the debate space in the first place. If the round is unfair, no one's going to learn from it. So fairness is a prior question. But even if you think that education comes first, we have already articulated why our topic literature massively outweighs theirs. Finally, you say reasonability and the right line of dropping the team because of terminal defense. But a couple of responses. Number one is that you conceded the reasonability leads to judge intervention. Even if you have provided a bright line, judges will intervene on whether they consider this to be a reasonable bright line in the first place, which still leads to judge intervention. Second of all is that judges will still intervene on whether a a piece of defense is sufficiently terminal. What is the definition of terminal defense? Judges have different opinions. For example, some judges on this circuit believe in frameouts and others do not. The implication is that you should still prefer competing interpretations because it maximizes your ability to, or because it's a binary choice, i.e. which interp is better, the interp or the counter interp. That minimizes judge intervention. Judge intervention massively outweighs any the reasons why they have said that reasonability is good, because judges will intervene on arbitrary criteria that frequently becomes racialized and gendered, which leads to lack of fairness and lack of education, also structural violence in the debate space, which means that we're definitely ahead. Disad. We'll concede that the economy is inevitably over the brink right now because the war in the Ukraine is taking way longer than expected. This has a couple of implications on the ground. Number one is that their app solvency, the solvency for both of their advantages is contingent on investors being confident in the first place, i.e. and B, investors being confident in starting new projects with the rare earth elements that are discovered, and being confident in the U.S.'s military. All of their solvency explanation that they read on the uniqueness that we will, which I'll get to in a second. All of their solvency defense is predicated on the argument that they will increase investment, which will inevitably solve backward these things. But if the economy is inevitably going to crash because the war in Ukraine is taking too long, that it doesn't matter in the first place, that terminally thumps all of this argument. You have an argument that Germany solves, but Germany can't solve Russia from going to war, which still thumps all of the investors' argument. Even if there is a coherent military strategy, investors do not care. Advantage. Extend the argument that there's no refineries for rare earth elements that exist in the status quo. It's impossible to actually get any of the rare earth elements in the first place. You have an argument that says that you increase investment, but you have conceded the preempt that the GOP won't allow this investment to happen in the first place because they'll market it as a campaign strategy against Biden. Even if investors decide to increase, that just causes GOP to win the next election cycle, which turns your app because they'll get rid of all the clean energy because they're in the pockets of deep oil. The implication is that it's a double bind. Either your app does literally nothing because investors are not willing to invest, or it galvanizes the GOP and allows them to win. Vote nay.
Awesome. All right. Let me get some of this stuff out of the way. Okay. Let's go a brief overview, and then on the T, and then we'll go to the T, and then we'll go to the advantage and use the cross applications of the DA on the advantage. Perfect. We're all good. Beginning now. At the end of the day, they have no fairness offense on the sheet, which means that if we win, that there's a fairness violation, we win the round. There are a couple of reasons that they're going to violate on fairness. One, let's talk about this we meet. They tell you that they meet because yttrium and neodymium are super rare. But we tell you that in our violation specifically, the experts think that these elements are not rare. They exist in the Earth's crust. There's 48 parts per million of neodymium in the Earth's crust, which the experts tell us is not that rare. We would tell you that things like lithium are going to be much more rare. There's also much more topic literature on lithium, so they can't meet. Then we tell you there's three reasons they're going to violate fairness. The first is topic literature. There's no way for us to clash or predict the app if they're not reasonably rare, right? If all of these elements are abundant, then they're not included in the topic literature. Means there's no way we can clash, and there's no way we can predict that the app's going to happen, which means we can't engage, which is one, unfair to us because it's not predictable, and two, it's going to outweigh on education because we can't engage, and aren't actually having a conversation about the topic. And then we tell you that there's no predictable ground. Then we tell you about ground. We tell you that they stole all of our imperialism DAs by reading this. And then on limits, we tell you that there's infinite possible AFs, and there's no way for neg to generate sticky offense. They're going to get up and tell you that we overlimit them, and that they can only pick a couple key things. But we would tell you that we don't overlimit you insofar as there's a whole bunch of topic literature about lithium and all of these other elements that are super rare and also much more applicable within the topic literature. But then we would, on their counterinterpretation, we would tell you to cross-apply topic literature as a reason why the counterinterpretation is independently bad. But then we would tell you that their counter standards are bad because even if our thing is not textually correct, it's defined within the topic literature. The important thing is what is defined within the topic literature because that's where we get all of our arguments. So it doesn't matter if we're textually correct.
Even if it is the case that they have a counterinterp that is justified by a section of the topic literature, the fact of the matter is that definition still provides no ground for the app.
Yeah, so it doesn't matter if it's justified by the topic literature. If the neg has literally no ground, there's no way that we can have a clash debate. But then we tell that the literature is going to outweigh on relevance relevancy, like if the literature that actually provides us with arguments is going to be on net more relevant than like some obscure chemistry council. But then we tell you that like Framer's intent is like bad, it's non-verifiable. They're going to try and go for Framer's intent, but just realize it's non-verifiable. Well, let's do some weighing on fairness over education. You're going to prefer fairness over education because one, it skews evaluation of the round. You can't evaluate this round if it's already been skewed. You can't determine who's the winner based on the flow because the flow is already skewed and they've won off a strategic advantage in prep. And two, we can't test them. We don't know if like green tech actually solves because we were not able to adequately engage on like elements as obscure as yttrium, which means that we don't know if the F is true.
And then extend ground is the biggest internal link to fairness, even if there's some argument for why we're predictable based on the topic literature, we don't have ground.
Okay, so extend ground is the biggest internal link to fairness because even if we are somehow predictable in the topic literature, which we're not, we still don't have any ground based on the fact that they can like pick and choose super obscure elements. But even if you think education is the most important, we're outweighing on topic literature here, so don't let them go for it. Don't let them go for education as like portable skills and clash. Realize because we cannot clash in the debate because we don't have any ground, which means that they like there's no access to portable skills. Realize you're going to prefer competing interps because reasonability is super arbitrary and leads to things like judge intervention on stuff that gets genderized very quickly. But on the DA, realize that we're conceding and that the collapse of the economy is going to happen inevitably, which stumps all of their uniqueness on Advantage 1. Realize that on Advantage 1 as well, extend that there's going to be no refineries because the GOP won't allow it because they want to like delegitimize the Biden presidency. So either there's no investment and there's no refineries because the GOP stops it, or the GOP gets galvanized, they go out to vote, and this causes like a decrease in investment in the future because the GOP really likes oil and that's where all of their money comes from. So we would say that on net it's going to be vote for the negative.
Okay, it's going to be, I guess, the critique, then it's going to be the disad, and then the af, and then T. Anybody not ready? Cool. On the critique, we'll indicate that in world where you do not articulate, you say that Gabe says this is an independent voting issue, and Gabe literally never says it's an independent voting issue, only that futurism is necessary to be able to resolve back for the impacts. You do not give them credence to this articulation. We'll also indicate that our link is going to be harder. We'll just read defense, particularly because we actually prescribe an action, which means a war features than you. Let's go to the dissad. You've conceded that the economy necessarily never actually causes war, which indicates it's only tried to be able to resolve back for hegemony. The only war scenario that comes out of the rest of the bloc is necessarily going to be the hegemony scenario, i.e. that when the rest of the world necessarily sees the United States as failing in its hegemonic project, it will absolutely cause war. You also will indicate that investor confidence is necessarily, there's no impact here. They've conceded the impact defense. Let's go to the AF. Two things I want. You say that this is not true because there's no refineries in a world where you've conceded that the clean energy exists in the status quo. The GOP can only stop future investments. This is not responsive to the articulation that the GOP is going to allow investment into the United States hegemonic project, which is things like advanced targeting, which indicates that we are able to resolve back for hegemony. And this is at best defense, which means that if risk we solve the affirmative, there's no reason you vote again for the negative on the case layer. Also, extinction is bad. It outweighs, and it's the only impact on the case layer. Let's go to topicality. This is the dumbest topicality shell I've ever heard. In the world of rare earth elements are literally defined by the IUPAC, the people who literally define elements. The topic literature articulation is going to be controlled by a bunch of experts and a bunch of journals in a world where these journals are necessarily not controlled by the literal IUPAC, the people who like, go out and name elements, who number them and put them on the periodic table. This is going to be the best indicator of topic literature. You say that your topic literature is necessarily good because it necessarily creates ground in a world where people are absolutely talking about this. Indicates there is no world in which you're like denied ground. Particularly, there's no potential. there's no articulated proven abuse in the world. Or you still get your economic scenarios, i.e. that you also get backlash scenarios where China could say China is literally 85% of the rare earth elements. We give you uniqueness that you could have used. There's no articulated scenario where you are denied ground, which indicates that your ground is necessarily bad. We'll also indicate that our topic literature is necessarily better for two reasons. First, the scientific literature is going to outweigh on real world applicability in a world where we are able to talk about things like, beyond just the fucking headline means that we're able to talk about things like why vaccines work, why vaccines might not work, and why the earth isn't flat. And this necessarily kills people in status quo. People are literally saying that, like, Tucker Carlson said it, or the policy experts said it, like Ted Cruz said it. Will indicate in the world where we create the better topic literature, a better understanding of the specific topics, the specific terms of art. We, i.e. things like, mercury can be in multiple different forms. Will indicate that this necessarily spills over to real world applicability, which indicates that our education is going to be better. Your only spike out of education is going to be that fairness controls or skews evaluation. Will indicate that you can absolutely hypotest dipshit. The first argument is going to be you can contest the claim warrant impact structure. This is on the critique. You conceded this, which means that you can actually talk about. You understand the way in which you evaluate the impacts. And secondarily, is bad method. This is a bad methodology. A is not evaluating any argument on the affirmative on the risk you can evaluate is infinitely less than a bad educational model. The B argument is an educational models that preclude talking about the affirmative decreased total clash, and this is necessarily bad because it turns all your fairness articulations mean that any way in which this means that you're not able to skew out the education claims. Will also indicate in a world where the internal link to the fairness only internally to education indicates that education is going to be the terminal impact, which means that if we control the best type of education, i.e. the scientific literature education, then we are going to be much better at the question of what you actually get to in a world where the clash necessarily is about something different. Then this means that the type of education that you generate is bad education in the first place. Let's go to the topic literature articulation. The first thing I want is that
If you create clash that's literally scientifically wrong, it's not good.
Yeah, let's go back up. If you click crash that's literally scientifically wrong, then that's necessarily bad education. Will indicate that you've conceded the articulation that you are literally defining rare metals. Rare earth elements is a term of art that is operated by chemists, engineers, policymakers, people that literally make the plan. They will indicate that this goes cold conceded in a world where you literally this is the international union of pure and applied chemistry. Will also indicate that the America Competes Act literally implicates rare earth metals, rare earth elements, not rare metals, particularly neodymium and dysprosium. Will indicate that there's no way in which you're winning the competing or counter or the interpretation debate, which means that you don't even need to result in reasonability. You can Google it. Well, I'll stake the entire round on this is what rare earth elements are. You are defining rare metals, which indicates there is a functional difference between the type of the ground that you want and the type of ground the topic necessarily explicates. You say that framers' intent is bad. Will indicate in the world where I'm not going for framers' intent. I'm going for the science literature, the topic literature, i.e. science literature standard. This is going to massively outweigh. This also explodes limits. You said that we don't have limits. Offense will indicate that this absolutely explodes limits. Gabe says gold, but will also indicate that there are other things that necessarily. There are other things that necessarily the interpretation allows, like a helium. I don't know, funny words in a birthday party app is going to be topical linear articulation because it's just elements that are rare. Will indicate that this absolutely explodes limits, which means that we have inroads to being able to the fairness offense out of the LOC and the block, which means that under fairness you're absolutely unfair because it's not topic literature and it's like a bunch of journals and not actually chemists. And we have better education. Good round, y'all.